Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel. In today's video, we're diving into a fascinating and richly historical topic, the origin and evolution of the 7 deadly sins. Have you ever wondered where these concepts we've heard about forever came from? We'll explore how Aristotle's philosophy, Horace's poetry, Evagrius Ponticus's reflections, and even Jewish apocryphal texts influenced the formation of the 7 deadly sins as we know them today. We'll show how these ideas intertwined over centuries to shape morality and ethics in the Christian tradition. So, if you're curious about history, philosophy, and theology, this video is for you. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss any updates. Ready to embark on this journey of knowledge with us? The 7 deadly sins, gluttony, lust, greed, wrath, envy, sloth, and pride, have been an integral part of human culture for centuries, reflecting the inherent flaws and temptations of the human condition. In contemporary times, these concepts continue to permeate various aspects of life and art, often explored in films, literature, and other forms of media. In cinema, the 7 deadly sins are a recurring theme, often used as mechanisms to explore the complexity of human emotions and behaviors. A notable example is the film Seven, 1995, directed by David Fincher, where 2 detectives investigate a series of brutal murders, each representing one of the deadly sins. This film not only uses the sins as a narrative device, but also as a way to comment on society's moral decay. In addition to Seven, many other films incorporate these sins into their plots in a less explicit but equally significant manner. In The Wolf of Wall Street, 2013, directed by Martin Scorsese, we see an exaggerated representation of greed and lust through the hedonistic life of the main character, Jordan Belfort. Belfort's story is a study on how unchecked greed can lead to corruption and self-destruction, reflecting one of the deadly sins in a modern context of financial and moral excesses. The deadly sins also appear subtly in various productions. In many romantic comedies, for example, envy may be a source of conflict between characters, while sloth can be addressed in narratives involving personal growth and overcoming stagnation. In family dramas and psychological thrillers, wrath often serves as a catalyst for intense conflicts and profound emotional revelations. The diffusion of the 7 deadly sins in contemporary culture is not limited to cinema. In literature, these themes are explored in deep and multifaceted ways. Modern authors often use the sins as metaphors to discuss human nature and the complexities of social interactions. Television series also follow this trend, with many plots developed around human flaws and desires, providing viewers with a reflection on their own behaviors and values. In the current context, where social media and consumer culture exacerbate certain human tendencies, the deadly sins manifest in new and intriguing ways. Pride, for example, can be seen in the constant quest for validation and status online, while envy is fueled by incessant comparison with others' idealized lives. Greed and lust are constantly explored in advertising and entertainment contexts, promoting the idea that material and sensual satisfaction is the path to happiness. The 7 deadly sins remain deeply rooted in modern culture, offering a mirror through which we can examine our own flaws and aspirations. They continue to be a powerful tool for storytelling and introspection, ensuring their ongoing relevance in art and everyday life. The 7 princes of hell and their association with the 7 deadly sins. The 7 princes of hell are demonic figures often associated with the 7 deadly sins, representing the personification of temptations that lead humans to sin. These princes, each linked to a specific sin, are described in various demonological and literary traditions, emblematic in the way they influence and corrupt souls. Lucifer, the most famous of the fallen angels, is generally associated with the sin of pride. Before his fall, Lucifer was considered the most beautiful and powerful of the angels, but his pride and desire to be equal to God led to rebellion and eventually expulsion from paradise. Pride is seen as the original sin that triggered the fall, both of Lucifer and of many other angels, reflecting the destructive pursuit of power and status above all else. Mammon is the prince of hell linked to the sin of greed, representing greed and obsession with the accumulation of material wealth, Mammon is often portrayed as a demon who encourages moral corruption through the insatiable pursuit of money and goods. Greed, under his influence, leads humans to neglect their values and relationships in favor of material gain. Asmodeus, linked to the sin of lust, is one of the most well-known demons for his association with carnal desires and uncontrolled passions. In Jewish and Christian tradition, Asmodeus is often described as a seducer who incites infidelity and debauchery, exploiting human weakness for sexual pleasure and sensory indulgence. Leviathan, associated with the sin of envy, is a monstrous sea creature symbolizing destruction and jealousy. In demonology, Leviathan provokes rivalries and resentments, fostering envy among humans. Envy under his influence leads people to covet what belongs to others, causing discord and disharmony. Beelzebub, one of the most notorious princes, is linked to the sin of gluttony. Originally a Philistine deity, Beelzebub, or Baal-zebub, was demonized in the Judeo-Christian context and came to be seen as a lord of excessive indulgence in food and drink. Gluttony, promoted by Beelzebub, manifests in the relentless pursuit of pleasure through excessive consumption, leading to physical and moral decay. Satan, the tempter, is often associated with the sin of wrath. As the adversary and accuser of humans, Satan incites hatred, revenge, and violence. Wrath, under Satan's influence, becomes a destructive fire that corrodes the soul, provoking conflicts and wars. Belphegor, the Prince of Sloth, is known for promoting inertia and procrastination. Often depicted as a demon offering easy solutions and paths of least resistance, Belphegor tempts humans to avoid hard work and responsibility. Sloth, encouraged by Belphegor, leads to stagnation and a lack of personal and spiritual fulfillment. The association of the seven princes of hell with the seven deadly sins provides a powerful symbolic framework for understanding the forces that corrupt and divert humanity from the path of virtue. Each prince, with their corresponding sin, offers a reminder of the temptations we all face and the devastating consequences that can result from yielding to these impulses. Thus, these demonic figures and their respective deadly sins continue to be a rich theme for exploration in literature, theology, and popular culture. Dante Alighieri's influence on the spread of the seven deadly sins. In the Divine Comedy, the monumental work of Italian poet Dante Alighieri, the seven terraces of purgatory are a crucial part of the spiritual journey that the protagonist, also named Dante, undergoes on his journey from the darkness of sin to the light of redemption. These terraces represent the stages of purification of souls aspiring to reach paradise, each corresponding to one of the seven deadly sins. Dante's influence on the popularization of the deadly sins is profound, as he integrates them in a structured and poetic manner, making them a central part of his narrative and, consequently, of the collective imagination. As Dante traverses purgatory, he and his guide, Virgil, encounter penitent souls at different levels of the mountain, each dedicated to the expiation of a specific sin. The first terrace is for those who were guilty of pride. Here, the penitents carry heavy stones, forcing them to bend in humility, counteracting the pride that once dominated them. This is a powerful example of how Dante illustrates the need to recognize and correct our moral flaws. The second terrace is dedicated to envy. The souls here have their eyelids sewn shut, preventing them from seeing and desiring what belongs to others. Through this vivid imagery, Dante shows how envy can blind people to their own blessings, leading them to a life of constant discontent and resentment. On the third terrace, the penitents are those who succumb to wrath. They are enveloped in dense smoke, symbolizing the blindness and confusion that anger can bring. Wrath, in Dante's Purgatory, is seen as a destructive fire that must be extinguished by patience and understanding. Sloth is the sin expiated on the fourth terrace. The penitents run incessantly, an activity contrasting with the indolence of their past lives. This terrace emphasizes the importance of diligence and continuous effort in the pursuit of salvation and personal fulfillment. On the fifth terrace, we find those guilty of greed and prodigality. The souls here lie with their faces against the ground, fixed in stark contrast to their former obsession with material goods. Dante highlights the damage caused by greed and lack of generosity, showing the need to find a balance between the material and the spiritual. The sixth terrace is for those who succumb to gluttony. The penitents are tormented by hunger and thirst, surrounded by fruitful trees that always remain out of reach. This terrace symbolizes the need for temperance and self-control, contrasting with the excess and indulgence of the sin of gluttony. Finally, on the seventh terrace, are those who yielded to lust. The souls here are purified by a wall of flames, representing the purgation of the carnal desires that once ruled their lives. Dante uses fire as a symbol of purification, suggesting that love should be elevated to a spiritual plane and not merely physical. Dante, with his Divine Comedy, played a significant role in popularizing and structuring the seven deadly sins. His detailed and vivid description of the expiation processes in purgatory provides a deep and enduring insight into the nature of sins and the ways in which they can be redeemed. Dante's work not only reinforced the notion of the deadly sins as fundamental moral principles, but also enriched the cultural understanding of these concepts, influencing Western literature, art, and theology for centuries. Thomas Aquinas, deepening the seven deadly sins. Thomas Aquinas, one of the most important theologians and philosophers of the Middle Ages, addressed the seven deadly sins with a depth and systematization that decisively influenced Christian moral theology. In his main work, the Summa Theologica, Aquinas not only analyzed the sins themselves but also their causes, consequences, and ways to combat them, offering a comprehensive and articulated vision of human ethics and morality. Aquinas understood the seven deadly sins as principal vices that give rise to other sins and immoral behaviors. He identified these sins as the main enemies of virtue and divine grace. Unlike specific sins, which are isolated acts, the deadly sins are habits or dispositions that incline a person to evil. This makes them particularly dangerous as they root themselves in human character, influencing a wide range of behaviors and attitudes. Pride, for example, is treated by Aquinas as the most serious capital sin, as it is the vice by which a person improperly exalts oneself, seeking to be superior to others and even to God. According to him, pride is the root of many other sins, as it leads to disobedience, ingratitude, and contempt for divine and human laws. Combating it requires humility, recognition of one's own limitations, and subordination to God's will. Greed, according to Thomas Aquinas, is the disorderly desire for material goods. He argues that greed is not just a matter of wanting more than one needs, but an excessive concern with wealth that leads to injustice, fraud, and neglect of others' needs. The opposite virtue, generosity, is fundamental to counterbalancing this vice, promoting fair distribution of resources and care for others. As for lust, Aquinas sees it as a disordering of sexual desires, diverting them from the natural purpose ordained by the Creator. He discusses the importance of chastity and moderation as virtues that help control and direct these desires appropriately. Lust, when excessive and uncontrolled, harms both personal dignity and human relationships. Anger is analyzed by Aquinas as a passion that can be just or unjust, depending on how it is directed. When disordered, anger leads to violence, revenge, and destruction. He suggests that patience and meekness are necessary virtues to moderate anger, helping people to react justly and controlled to injustices and provocations. Regarding envy, Aquinas describes it as resentment towards the good of others, which hinders charity and solidarity. Envy is particularly pernicious because, instead of desiring good for oneself, it desires evil for others. Benevolence and joy for others' success are virtues that help overcome this vice. Gluttony is treated as the immoderate desire for the pleasure of food and drink. Aquinas emphasizes the importance of temperance, which regulates the use of sensory pleasures, promoting a healthy balance and avoiding excesses that harm both the body and the soul. Finally, sloth, or aesthesia, is described as a sadness or apathy towards spiritual goods, leading to neglect of duties and avoidance of responsibilities. Diligence and zeal are virtues that combat sloth, encouraging hard work and devotion to fulfilling obligations. In addressing the seven deadly sins, Thomas Aquinas not only identified their manifestations and dangers, but also offered a rich analysis of the opposing virtues that can help individuals to overcome them. His systematic and philosophical approach provided a solid foundation for Christian morality, influencing generations of theologians, philosophers, and believers. His work continues to be a fundamental reference for understanding and overcoming human vices. Where did the 7 deadly sins come from? Evagrius Ponticus, a monk and theologian of the 4th century, was a key figure in the formation of Christian monastic spirituality. He developed a set of teachings on the 8 evil thoughts, or logismoi, which are internal considerations that lead to sin and spiritual disorder. These thoughts are precursors to the 7 deadly sins and deeply influenced subsequent moral theology. The first thought is gluttony, which Evagrius describes as an immoderate and obsessive desire for food and drink. This thought is not just about the physical need for sustenance, but about an emotional and psychological attachment to the sensory pleasure that food provides. Gluttony can lead to distraction from spiritual life and excess that harms both the body and the soul. Lust is the second evil thought. Evagrius sees lust as an uncontrolled desire for sexual pleasures, which diverts a person from purity and spiritual discipline. Lust transforms natural desire into a compulsive impulse that can dominate the mind and lead a person away from their religious and moral practices. The third thought is greed, the insatiable desire to accumulate material goods and wealth. Evagrius highlights that greed arises from fear of poverty and lack of trust in divine providence. This evil thought leads to constant restlessness and injustice, as the relentless pursuit of wealth can lead to selfishness and neglect of others' needs. Anger is the fourth evil thought, characterized by fervent resentment and an exaggerated emotional response to real or perceived offenses. Evagrius warns that anger can consume a person, leading to verbal or physical violence and breaking relationships. Anger impedes inner peace and harmony with others, being a major obstacle to spiritual life. The fifth thought is sadness, or aesthesia, which Evagrius describes as a deep and paralyzing melancholy. This sadness is different from common sorrow, as it is rooted in a lack of faith and hope. It leads to apathy, demotivation, and avoidance of spiritual responsibilities, hindering progress in monastic life and the pursuit of virtue. Aesthesia, or spiritual sloth, is the sixth evil thought. Although closely related to sadness, aesthesia is specifically the aversion to spiritual tasks and monastic routine. Evagrius sees aesthesia as a powerful temptation that can cause monks to abandon their vocation, leading to spiritual stagnation and lack of commitment. The seventh thought is vainglory, which involves an excessive desire for recognition and praise for one's own merits and virtues. Vainglory diverts a person from humility and selfless service to God, causing them to seek the approval of men instead of divine approval. This thought can corrupt even good actions, making them a means of self-promotion. Finally, the eighth thought is pride, which Evagrius considers the most dangerous of all. Pride is the root of many other sins, as it leads to arrogant self-sufficiency and the rejection of divine grace. Those dominated by pride believe themselves to be superior to others and even independent of God, becoming spiritually isolated and inflexible. Evagrius Ponticus's teachings on the 8 evil thoughts offer a profound analysis of the internal temptations that everyone faces. He emphasizes the importance of mental and spiritual vigilance to combat these thoughts and promote a virtuous life. His ideas were fundamental to the later development of Christian theology and continue to influence monastic spirituality and ascetic practice. Philosophers and their influence on the creation of the 7 deadly sins. The constitution of the 7 deadly sins is a complex process that is not limited to Christian tradition, but is also influenced by philosophers and poets of classical antiquity, such as Aristotle and Horace. These thinkers, with their reflections on ethics, morality, and human behavior, provided an intellectual foundation that helped shape the Christian understanding of vices and virtues. Aristotle, in his work Nicomachean Ethics, developed an ethical theory centered on the pursuit of virtue as a means of achieving eudaimonia, or full happiness. He classified vices as excesses or deficiencies of character traits that, in the right measure, constitute virtues. For example, courage is the balanced virtue between recklessness and cowardice. This notion of balance and moderation was fundamental to the Christian understanding of the deadly sins. Gluttony and lust, for example, can be seen as excesses in bodily desires, while greed represents an excess in the desire for material goods. Aristotle's influence is evident in how Christian theologians, such as Thomas Aquinas, adopted and adapted his ethics of virtues to identify and combat sins. Horace, the Roman poet, also indirectly contributed to the formation of the concept of the deadly sins through his poetic works and satires that criticized the excesses and vices of Roman society. In his epistles and satires, Horace often addressed themes such as greed, lust, gluttony, and anger, ridiculing those who indulged in these behaviors. His literary approach to human vices not only entertained but also educated, promoting the idea that moderation and self-awareness were paths to a more balanced and virtuous life. Horace's social critique resonated with early Christian writers who sought to warn the faithful about the dangers of vices. Furthermore, Horace popularized the concept of aurea mediocritas, or the golden mean, the idea that happiness and virtue lie in the middle ground, away from extremes. This concept is paralleled in the doctrine of the deadly sins, where each sin is seen as a form of imbalance that must be corrected by the corresponding virtue. Horace's influence is noticeable in how the deadly sins are presented not only as moral failings, but as deviations from the path of moderation and balance. The integration of Aristotle's and Horace's ideas into Christian theology largely occurred through the efforts of the Church Fathers and medieval theologians, who sought to harmonize classical philosophy with Christian doctrine. Thomas Aquinas, for example, was one of the main figures responsible for synthesizing Aristotelian ethics with Christian morality, resulting in a robust theological framework that incorporated the 7 deadly sins. This synthesis helped popularize the idea that vices should be understood and combated as moral imbalances that lead individuals away from virtuous living and divine grace. Therefore, the influence of Aristotle and Horace on the constitution of the 7 deadly sins is profound and multifaceted. While Aristotle provided the philosophical foundation for understanding vices as ethical imbalances, Horace helped popularize criticism of excesses through his poetry and satire. Together, their thoughts helped shape a moral understanding that was foundational to Christian theology and continues to influence Western ethics and morality to this day. The Testament of the 12 Patriarchs. The Testament of the 12 Patriarchs is a Jewish apocryphal work dating from the intertestamental period, composed of a series of writings attributed to the 12 sons of Jacob. One notable aspect of this work is the mention of the 7 spirits of deceit, which are personifications of vices or temptations that divert humans from the path of righteousness. These spirits foreshadow the 7 deadly sins, contributing significantly to the formation and consolidation of this concept in the Christian tradition. In the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, particularly in the Testament of Reuben, the 7 spirits of deceit are described. The first is the spirit of fornication, which leads to uncontrolled desire and lust. The second is the spirit of greed, which incites love of money and avarice. The third is the spirit of fighting, which fosters violence and anger. The fourth is the spirit of falsehood, which promotes lying and deception. The fifth is the spirit of pride, which incites arrogance and selfishness. The sixth is the spirit of disobedience, which leads to rebellion against God and authorities. And the seventh is the spirit of injustice, which instigates the practice of morally wrong and unjust actions. These spirits of deceit represent temptations and moral deviations that are remarkably similar to the deadly sins later defined by Christian theology. They deeply influence how sins are understood and combated within the religious tradition, offering a moral framework that underscores the need for spiritual and moral vigilance. The influence of the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs and the 7 spirits of deceit in the creation of the 7 deadly sins is significant. The deadly sins are formally articulated in medieval Christian tradition, but the underlying concepts were already present in earlier Jewish texts. Evagrius Ponticus's spirits of deceit, a Christian theologian from the 4th century, are a clear example of how these ideas transformed and evolved. Evagrius developed the list of the 8 evil thoughts, which would later profoundly influence the list of the 7 deadly sins formulated by Gregory the Great and Thomas Aquinas. The evolution of the 7 deadly sins can be seen as a synthesis of various ethical and religious traditions that precede and complement Christianity. The Testament of the 12 Patriarchs provides an important foundation for this evolution, showing how vices and temptations were understood and combated in Jewish literature. The description of the 7 spirits of deceit offers an early and structured insight into human failings that would become central in Christian moral theology. In Christian tradition, this literary and moral heritage was integrated and refined, resulting in a consolidated list of the 7 deadly sins: pride, greed, lust, wrath, gluttony, envy, and sloth. Each of these deadly sins can be seen as a developed and specific version of the spirits of deceit mentioned in the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs. The transition from a list of vices or spirits of deceit to a systematic codification of the deadly sins reflects the ongoing evolution of moral and theological thought. Thus, the influence of the 7 spirits of deceit in the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs is evident in the creation and consolidation of the 7 deadly sins. This Jewish apocryphal work provides an essential foundation that, when reinterpreted and adapted by Christian thinkers, contributed to the formation of a lasting and widely influential moral system in Western tradition. Through this integration, the deadly sins became a vital tool for moral introspection in the pursuit of virtue in Christian life. In conclusion, the creation of the 7 deadly sins, as we know them today, is the result of a confluence of theological, philosophical, and literary influences that developed over centuries. These sins codify the most pernicious human vices and were formulated through a synthesis of ideas from various cultural and intellectual traditions, including the significant contributions of figures such as Aristotle, Horace, Evagrius Ponticus, and Jewish apocryphal texts like the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs. From these influences, the Christian Church, especially during the Middle Ages, consolidated the idea of the 7 deadly sins. Gregory the Great in the 6th century and later Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century were key figures in this process. Gregory refined Evagrius's list, while Aquinas, with his Summa Theologica, provided a detailed analysis of the deadly sins, explaining their causes, consequences, and remedies. Aquinas' theology, deeply influenced by Aristotle, integrated philosophical and theological traditions, giving a definitive structure to the deadly sins we know today. Thus, the creation of the 7 deadly sins is a rich fusion of philosophical, literary, and theological traditions. Aristotle's ideas of balance and moderation, Horace's social criticisms, Evagrius Ponticus's systematization of vices, and Jewish apocryphal traditions collectively contributed to the formulation of these sins. This confluence of influences helped shape a moral understanding that became central in Christian ethics and continues to influence the Western view of vices and virtues. And we've reached the end of our video today. We hope you enjoyed exploring with us the fascinating history of the 7 deadly sins and how they were influenced by figures such as Aristotle, Horace, Evagrius Ponticus, and Jewish apocryphal texts. It was a true journey through time and philosophy, wasn't it? If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to leave your like. Thumbs up, it really helps our channel grow and bring more interesting and informative content to you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Click on the subscribe button and activate the bell to receive notifications whenever we post a new video. Do you have any questions, suggestions, or want to share your opinion on the topic? Leave your comment down below. We love hearing what you have to say and participating in discussions in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and until the next video, take care and keep exploring the wonderful world of knowledge.